Welcome to the Life Coaching with Ryan podcast, episode 12. So today we transition from my friend Chris to my friend Jenny, who you heard in my first podcast series, Words, talking about labels, self-talk, and mantras. And I knew she had recently lost her parents, and so I wanted to interview her too, along our theme for this month, Wrongness of Death. Now, a few things of note. One, we did our interview together on hotel Wi-Fi, so she breaks up in some parts, but I decided to release the interview anyway because I felt there was so much value in what we discussed. So I think it's worth listening through some of the ips and glurps and blips that you'll be getting. Also, as we wrap up our month here over the next 2 weeks, I wanted to take some time to thank my new patrons, Erin and John. Thank you so much for contributing over on patreon.com. Please go check me out, patreon.com/lifecoachingwithryan, and support the cause. And with that, let's get into it.
I'll do a little, just in case I do want to sync up any audio, though I probably won't care. But okay, so I'm a little bit less nervous this time compared to the first time, but I'll go ahead and introduce you again similarly to the last time. And that is that my guest today is the lovely and wonderful Jenny Ward, who is a teacher, a life coach, a parent, a yoga teacher, all-around badass, who I'm so happy that I get to hang out with again today for a different topic, being the wrongness of death. So hi, Jenny.
Hi.
So I thought to start, it might be good kind of talk about, I don't know, overview of the loss of your parents.
Mm-hmm.
Just a couple minutes and let people know kind of what the backstory is on that.
Yeah. It's so funny because when you lose someone, you forget how long ago it was. It's sort of but it seems so recent at the same time.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking, like, when did my dad die? And it's like the years, I can't really pinpoint when he died. Probably 5 years ago. But my dad died of cancer first. He was diagnosed and passed away maybe 8 or 9 months later.
Oh, wow. Quick.
It was quick. It felt like eternity in terms of the pain that he went through. And then my mom was diagnosed right after my dad died. And she passed away about a year after that. So they passed away in the time frame of 2 years around this, I lost them in 2 years, basically. So I went from burying my dad to going to see my mom, and they lived far away from me, so I had to fly there. And so I feel, in hindsight, sounds weird, but I was already numb. Like, I lost my dad and I was still on that energy level. So I feel like my mom, I kind of flew right into my mom. It was sort of like, oh, I know how to do this. That sounds crazy, but I think if my mom was 5, 6, 7 years later, I would have been like jolted back into, but it felt like I've already in the pain. I might as well just keep going, sort of.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I already knew the script.
Yeah.
And it sounds like I'm removed from it because I was removed from it.
Yeah.
My goal was to take care of my parents and to basically watch them die. So that was what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned a script. I think that's interesting. Before I jump into any other questions, how would you identify that script?
I think it's complicated.
Sure.
When you hear, hi, it's your dad, and I have something to tell you, and I have cancer, I'm going to be okay.
Right.
I think the writing of the script begins then. How long does he have? How often can I get there? What do I need to say to him?
Right.
Am I capable of watching him die? Am I capable of watching him be weak?
Mm. Yeah.
You know, I think it begins the script of there's a finality and it's known. It's sort of like, okay. And I felt the same script with my mom, like, okay, how soon can I get there? When it's hospice, like, you know, you see the through line. Like once hospice came, it was, I knew she was going to leave. It's like we all kind of go during, it's like marching orders. And unfortunately, because it's very organized,
Regimented, yeah.
it removes you from feeling the pain.
Sure.
So I understand why people control it and marginalize it. And to a certain extent, I did as well, because it's just too painful. You just don't want to deal with that day to day. And then the guilt if you can't be there. And yeah, it's like sort of all the shame that you learned as a child exaggerated to like obligation, shame, you know, smushed. It's just like, oh, what's my role as a child? What do I have to do? That's the script. I mean, that's what came up for me, at least.
Yeah. Well, when I was talking to Chris, which theoretically was going to get released before this conversation, what was really interesting was processing what you're calling the script, right? Is what do the next couple months look like? What do the next couple years look like? What is kind of well, in his circumstance, there was a sense of finality also, which ended up getting flipped over and not being as final as had been anticipated. So the script kind of got flipped in the middle. But certainly talking about mortality, finality,
yes,
and the experience of coming to the end of a journey with someone was still very present in those conversations. So actually, that's kind of what I wanted to ask you about next. As you mentioned that you were traveling back and forth, so you weren't in a position where you were getting to care directly for your parents. Is that an accurate statement? So you had visited them as they were passing, but you weren't there with them for the whole process?
Yeah, stayed at the end for a bit of time. Came to my dad, mom, making sure she was paying for free, but they weren't really. I was there 4 weeks for both of them. I did not stay for them to die. I was not there for either one of their deaths. It's interesting because my sister was. And in both situations, I had an obligation to get my daughter, who was with her dad. So in both situations, I had to go retrieve my daughter from her dad in another country and bring her back. And I remember feeling torn about, I knew that if I left, they were going to die. Like I knew that I was not going to be able to see them die. And I remember feeling, do I go see my daughter or do I watch my dad die? Do I go see my daughter or do I watch my mom die? And that's, I think for me, has been the most interesting choice. I didn't see either one of them pass away. And I then like watch the go, oh, it was so magical when they left their body and everybody was like, oh, Shanti. And I was like, I, for some reason, felt I know my limitation and I just couldn't do that. And I was surprised by that. I was like, wow, but I was willing to just accept it. Yeah, I think it's interesting. You realize your own relationship to what are the last moments I want to see with this person? How do I want to, what are my takeaways with this person? What can I handle? What can I not handle? What is my obligation? What is not my obligation? And what do they, if I were to ask my mom, would she be okay if I wasn't there if she died? Yeah, she would have been okay. She would have been okay with me being with my daughter. So all of these questions that never come up in life just become really you never know how to answer them until they're there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of interesting, and maybe we can get to this, but I'm always been more interested to how people handle death. What I heard when my mom was dying, what I heard after she died, what comes up for people. And we are not educated on that. We do not have classes on that. We do not talk about that.
Right.
And for me, that's a deficit in our culture. There's this way or this way, and that's it.
Right.
And Jenny, you should have been there for your mom's death. You should and that's it. And there's no like gray. There's no gray.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I actually answered your question, but I was there. I was there for a significant amount of time, especially with my mom. I took care of my mom. I changed her diaper. I changed her diaper.
Wow.
I bathed her. I heard her talk about her mom. My mom was seeing her own mother. I watched significant esoteric things that were really mind-boggling. I got to make my peace with my mom.
Yeah.
So for me, that was what really mattered.
So tell me more about that. How did the dying process change your relationship with your mom?
I think prior to her dying, I think when she found out she was diagnosed, this was her 4th bout of cancer. So she was a major bad. But when she told me she was diagnosed, I knew this was it. I think she was super tired.
Yeah.
And she was fighting it. And so once she told me into her death, I think she and I did a lot of work together. I think we said things to each other that we probably should have said many years. I found my mom in touch with her own mortality, being so spiritual and so kind and so generous with her heart. I found the pieces of her personality that, and lived in fear were like removed. It was sort of like she became a 5-year-old girl, wonder about life, and I was really grateful with her. I am glad that I got to experience that from her. I wanted her to be at peace with life, to enjoy life. So she did the last year. I mean,
Good.
She definitely had deeper talks and trusted life and told me it was going to be okay. And, she did all these things for my daughter. She planned out all these things, like what she was going to get. So Leela would be, to this day, Leela gets things every month. It's sort of like she organized
Wow.
ways of her being connected with my daughter. So my mom was very conscientious of how to keep her legacy alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, but I mean, yeah.
Go ahead.
But I think it's, I don't want to sound ungrateful because I am. I think what my mom taught, no way I'm going to wait to the last year of my life to live like this.
Yeah.
There's just no way that it's going to take knowing that I'm going to die to finally live. And although I'm so glad that she got to finally experience that, I was also, I learned that I don't want to do that, and also kind of angry at it. And I think after she died, I got in touch with why weren't you why didn't you do that the whole time you were here? Like, why weren't you that way when I needed you to be that way? And, it was like I had to grieve the mother I never had and grieve getting her for 1 year when she was dying. And I mean, it's so complicated. It's so complex. But anger is a big piece. And when people,
Yeah.
and we could talk about this, but when people die, we have a tendency to fantasize about how they were.
Yeah. Yeah.
We focus on all the good, and and it makes us feel better, and I completely get that. Romanticize them, but I chose not to do that. I don't feel like that's healthy or productive when you're grieving.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
think it's actually destructive.
Well, rose-colored glasses are a typical coping mechanism for lots of areas of our lives, whether it's a past relationship. I was talking to someone recently who was talking about, I was talking to a client recently, and she was talking about how she thinks about her ex, and it requires reminding herself how shitty the relationship was to go, oh, why am I giving him any space in my brain right now?
Exactly.
And it's like, yeah, that's valuable. And also I find that telling ourselves half truths or barely truths in order to cope for something
Yes.
often leads us to not trust ourselves.
Yes.
And even if it's just not trusting ourselves in the moment, means that coping strategy is not very successful because it doesn't actually address the feeling we have underneath, right? So we have all this like, and we try to tell ourselves a lie in order to calm this down, but all it does is cover it up, and we still are like
Yes.
underneath. So why not be
Deal
honest?
with that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Experience the discomfort. Now, if there's someone who loops in their feelings, and that's a chronic clinical thing, then of course they need to choose a different strategy.
Yes.
But being able to be present with our discomfort and then telling ourselves truths about alternate truths, not alternative facts, but things that are actually true,
Yes.
that are true, but it is a different perspective, can be very valuable. That's one thing. But it's another thing to just be like, my mom was the best. She was always the best. We never had any fights ever. She always took such good care of me. It was always so full of life. And oh, wait, no, I actually experienced her as a horrid bitch who sucked my soul for most of my life, right? There's a different type of resolution to come to, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think for me, I mean, I grew up playing pretend. I learned how to play pretend. You just smile, Jenny, and you just be a good girl. And even though our family is falling apart, no one needs to know about it. Please don't rock the boat. I learned all those strategies. It doesn't mean that I liked them, but I understood them. So when she died, I no longer wanted to pretend. And I think on some level it was freeing. I'm actually gonna grieve without pretending. And that was extremely relieving. I didn't have the parental units to hold me accountable to pretend anymore. I didn't have to. And I could do it the way that I wanted to do it. I could find the way Jenny could find it. And who was Jenny anyways? So when you lose both your parents, you kind of become an orphan.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting place to be in, because then you get to decide. I wouldn't want this for younger children, but when you're in your 40s, you're like, wow, okay, who am I?
Yeah.
What do I need to?
You're only 21, though. I don't know what you're talking about. This whole in your for anyone who listened to the first podcast that we did.
Exactly.
Exactly. But anyway, yes. And when you're 40s, it's a different experience because you're a grown-ass woman.
Yes.
You have your own adult life.
Yes.
You can make different decisions than someone who is still reliant in some way, whether fiscally or emotionally or whatever else, on their parents.
Yes.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. So you're talking about caring for your mom. What impact did caring for your mom have on your identity, sense of self, relationship with her? Like what was that in any way transformative, having to care for her?
It's a really good question. I'm going to answer it in two ways.
Cool.
I remember when I was bathing her, and I was trying to help her get out of the shower, and she just had a very hard time walking, but she still had like her sense, like she still could talk, and she was very And so we had to put her diaper on, and my mom's like, who would have thought that you'd be putting diapers on me? You know, like she made this like because at that point she was already in childlike wonder. Like she could find play. And I remember laughing, going, "Yeah, it's pretty interesting, Mom," you know, and like that banter. But then I'm going to answer the second way. I always took care of my mom. This was just different because it was horrifying to watch her die and to become weaker and not have any control over it. I had no control over it. I didn't know if the next day she was going to be awake. And that's horrifying experience. But the act of taking care of my mom, it was different because it was not just emotional, it was physical now. That was very normal for me. So I think the abnormal part was she was going to die. And that was the only thing that was abnormal about it. And I couldn't ask her to be my mom anymore. Even if she was my mom, like, hey, Mom, I'm going to go to Nordstrom. What do you recommend I buy? Like, I still had my mom to call to do those kinds of questions. I still could call my mom to sew something for my daughter. Like, I still had a mom to call. And I was like, oh, this is different because I no longer have a mom. But it wasn't different in terms of me taking care of her.
Interesting.
Yeah. I was my mother's mother for my childhood. So
in your book, you mentioned that.
Yeah. But this was different because I had to come to terms with the mom that I needed her to be was never going to happen. Right. And the mom that she showed up to be, I was losing. So it was like, it's a really interesting, I had to create her to be my mom in the best way that she could. And I feel like I got to that place in my life where I knew her strengths and I knew her capabilities, and I was going to lose that.
Yeah.
And I think that's just interesting. I realized how important that was too. And I used to frivolize it, but that was important as well.
So you had two losses effectively compounding each other.
Yeah.
Both the transition into how you cared for your mom and then the loss of that new mom, as it were.
Yeah. And also I think I've grieved, and I think when I've talked to a lot of people about this, especially women who have had narcissistic parents. I don't like labeling, but my mom had a very hard time stepping outside of herself. So I think you grieve your whole life not having that kind of a mother. I think you recognize the mother that you do have, and then you go over to your best friend's house and you recognize that there are other people's moms that
are a different
way. And I mourned that from a very early age. So her dying was that keeps happening. It's not because she's dead I don't mourn that. It's like that keeps continuing on.
Right.
That loss of like, I never had a mom like that. I wish I had a mom like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when she passed, what were your responsibilities once she had passed? Like, were you executor of the estate? What was your sister's involvement? Like, what did that whole situation look like?
Yeah. I believe wholeheartedly that you find out who people are when someone dies. Or when you get a divorce, or like, I don't know, and like big shit happens.
Yeah.
People's stuff comes up. It's like, so, you know, because I lost my parents in a time frame of 2 years, I just got to really see major dysfunction. It was like a tornado of all the work that we didn't do as a family. Just like all the pretending, erupting, like all like be good, be nice. It was like, wow, like no one's being good and no one's being nice. And on some level, it was like freeing. I'm like, oh, great. Now we're all kind of being who we are. Okay, I can show up for this, right? I'm in. Like Jenny was, I've wanted this my whole life. Exactly. So, you know, I think I'm still processing the relationship that I had with my sister, and how when our parents died, it exacerbated every single thing we didn't want to deal with. Our parents kind of kept us together. And so it was like the lid was off and she was free to unleash. And that's obviously hers, but it was refreshing, actually, to finally hear the truth. So she was the executor. I had to deal with, you know, making sure the life insurance policy went through, making sure the people that were getting the money from the life insurance, because my mom had a partner. I mean, it was the house that she lived in, my sister was in charge of, but I was in charge of getting everything removed out of the house, boxing everything up, selling it. So it took a significant amount of time. I remember, I mean, and this is, I'm going to try and be really political correct because I still have work to do on this. So just like, bear with me. It's when someone dies, what we do, how we cope. So my sister's making sure she gets everything. And I'm like, just take it. You know, like I don't want any of it. Like all of my mom's ceramics, and like, I took one and that was enough. And my sister's like, I get all of this. I get it all. You know, it's like, I get to be loved more. And I'm like, just take it, you know, and it's like, everyone's shit comes up.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's nothing you can do that's logical in any of those moments. And I just decided to let the tornado be the tornado and not engage until 6 months later, because it's illogical what you're feeling, and
Irrational.
it's completely irrational. And I think in general, my sister was in charge of making sure the church was like, we who was going to be invited. Yes, live in Ohio, I live in California, so I was in charge of, like, I had to sell her car, and it was just, I've never really had to do before, and and I didn't want to do it. Literally didn't want to do things when he wants to hide and run away and like show up to a car dealership.
Right. So unfortunately, my hotel Wi-Fi is acting up, so you were chopping up quite a bit during that last part. But let me see if I can capture it. Essentially, you had a lot of stuff come up that you hadn't previously had to deal with, whether it was planning a memorial or selling cars and things like that. And the last thing you really wanted to do when you were in that emotional state was have to deal with all of those things. Did I do an okay job of capturing that?
Yep.
Excellent. And now the internet is at least moderately stable, so hopefully we won't have to another interruption. But yeah, so sorry, I didn't know if you had more to say about that.
I think for me, we'll get there, but all of that stuff is to do, and on some level, going, waking up, it keeps, because there's so much to do, you get do it, and I think there's a purpose in that. I think it's benefit. It's when it's 2 months after is when it hits you. Shock. I don't remember my like pieces of my mom and dad's funeral, but not. It's all done and everything is settled. Seen all the cray cray with your family, and and the tornado stopped back into real life. Is when people don't get any support. All the cards come, people Facebook you, says, I wish you love and light. But life goes on, and you are never the same. So it's sort of like into a movie and going, do this, but everyone's like, hey, good to see you, expecting you to be participating in life. Me, that was the big challenge. I comprehend the lack of understanding and awareness from people, and it's not their fault. We're just not taught. I used to go to the doctors and they would want my medical history and I would just lose it and leave. Like, I didn't know my medical history. I didn't know if my dad had an issue with his blah, blah, blah. So like those are the things that I think we don't think about when we're burying someone. You know, it's like shock, 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 and then selling and selling and selling. We don't really think about integrating into life or significantly altered. It reminds me, and in no way, shape, or form am I saying I'm the same, but it reminds me of coming back from war, you know, and being asked to participate in life when you have watched people be blown up for like a year and a half and like, welcome home, and good luck getting a job, and you look great, and so, you know, and it's like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do. It's that similar, like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know who I am. It's like a weird, that when we talk about loss and grief, I feel that is where, as a society, we are losing touch with moving on too quickly. And it's just not true. It's just not a reality. Life moves on, but you are fundamentally different. So that's where I think more people need the support and care, actually, when we're talking about grief and loss.
And here's a little preview of what's coming up next week.
Yeah, something that I think is very interesting and why I called this theme the wrongness of death is because I find in our culture we think of death as separate from life, as somehow evil because it takes life. We see it as a deficit.
Yes.
And we see it as cutting out of, as it were, a removal of something, and we want to remain whole, and therefore death is bad. So one thing that I found very interesting in my conversation with Chris was that we talked about the difference between a dying ritual and a death ritual, right? That we don't tend to have dying rituals in our culture. You said, you know, either you're there for your parents' death or you're not. If that's a right or a wrong thing. We don't have what is the year before your parents' death look like? If you know for a full year that they're going to die, or, you know, other than unction or, you know, the sacraments for the dying or the sick, they're specific to certain religious practices. Oh, I lost you for a second there and you came back. That's good. We don't really have anything for that. And then from my conversation with you right now, what I'm also hearing is we don't have any reintegration rituals or practices either. We have death is awful. Now you're dead. Let's accept that you're dead by having a memorial, funeral, burial, cremation, whatever it is. And then as soon as we're done with that, let's get back to living life, right?
Yes.
But there seems to be no honoring of the dying process, nor honoring of the living without this person process.
Yes.
Following.
I agree.
So what is it that you would have liked?
Like the show? Consider subscribing through my Patreon at patreon.com/lifecoachingwithryan. You'll get early access to shows and potentially a host of other rewards. Want more? You can also find me streaming on Twitch at twitch.tv/lifecoachingwithryan, where I play some games and I continue the conversation. I'm pretty active on Instagram. You can find me at instagram.com/educate4, the number 4, _ life. That's where I do my book club, I record the book club episodes live on Mondays, and then I post them to IGTV. Later, I post them on YouTube. See you next time.